Welcome to Wyoming, America's least populous state, where wide open spaces meet dramatic mountain ranges, where geysers erupt against a backdrop of untamed wilderness, and where the spirit of the American West still runs as deep as the Yellowstone River cutting through ancient canyons. With fewer than 600,000 residents spread across nearly 98,000 square miles, Wyoming is a land defined by extremes. It's the 10th largest state by area, but ranks dead last in population. It's a place where you're more likely to encounter a herd of pronghorn antelope than another car on the highway, where energy production powers the nation, while national parks preserve some of Earth's most pristine landscapes. This is the Equality State, the first government in the world to grant women the right to vote. This is a state built on coal, oil, and natural gas, yet home to the world's first national park. From the towering columns of Devil's Tower to the Technicolor hot springs of Yellowstone, from the jagged peaks of the Tetons to the windswept high plains of the East, Wyoming embodies the untamed spirit of the American frontier. Join us as we explore the geography, history, economy, and culture of Wyoming, a state where the past and present collide in spectacular fashion. Wyoming sits in the heart of the Mountain West, bordered by Montana to the north, South Dakota and Nebraska to the east, Colorado and Utah to the south, and Idaho to the west. With a total area of 97,813 square miles, Wyoming is the 10th largest state in the nation, yet home to just 587,000 people, making it the least populous state and giving it the second lowest population density behind only Alaska. What makes Wyoming truly unique is its geography. Unlike most states with natural boundaries like rivers or coastlines, Wyoming is defined by straight lines of latitude and longitude. Its borders are 41 degrees north and 45 degrees north latitude, and 104 degrees 3 minutes west and 111 degrees 3 minutes west longitude, a perfect geodesic quadrangle, though surveying inaccuracies in the 19th century mean the actual border deviates up to half a mile in some spots. Wyoming's landscape divides into three distinct regions: the Great Plains in the east, the Rocky Mountains dominating the west and center, and the intermontane basins tucked between the ranges. The Rocky Mountains form the backbone of Wyoming. These aren't just any mountains. They're some of the most spectacular peaks in North America. The Wind River Range in west-central Wyoming contains some of the state's most rugged terrain, with 9 peaks exceeding 13,000 feet. Gannett Peak, at 13,804 feet, stands as Wyoming's highest point and the tallest mountain in the Rocky Mountain Range south of the Canadian border. The Teton Range rises dramatically from Jackson Hole, their jagged peaks creating one of the most iconic mountain skylines in America. Unlike most ranges that gradually ascend from foothills, the Tetons thrust straight up from the valley floor, a result of tectonic uplift that began just 9 million years ago, making them the youngest range in the Rockies. Grand Teton itself reaches 13,775 feet, and the entire range presents a textbook example of fault block mountains. Further north, the Absaroka Range forms the eastern edge of Yellowstone National Park. The Bighorn Mountains front the Great Plains in the north, while the Laramie Range extends north from Colorado in the south. The Medicine Bow Mountains and Sierra Madre Range add to Wyoming's mountainous character in the south and southeast. These mountains weren't always here. The landscape we see today dates back over 100 million years to when colliding tectonic plates buckled the Earth's crust and thrust these mountains skyward. Later, Glaciers carved the deep canyons and U-shaped valleys. Some glacial remnants still cling to the highest peaks. While mountains define Wyoming's western two-thirds, the eastern third belongs to the Great Plains. But these aren't the flat prairies of Kansas. Wyoming's portion of the Great Plains is high-elevation terrain, part of what's known as the High Plains, averaging 6,700 feet above sea level. This makes Wyoming the second highest state in the nation by mean elevation, trailing only Colorado. The plains gradually rise as you move west toward the mountains, presenting a mosaic of short-grass prairie interspersed with cottonwoods and shrubs along rivers like the Platte and the Powder. This landscape receives little rainfall, typically less than 12 inches annually, making it semi-arid. The Black Hills extend into northeastern Wyoming from South Dakota, covering about one-third of this ancient mountain range. Here you'll find Devil's Tower National Monument, a stunning igneous rock formation rising 1,267 feet above the Belle Fourche River, standing 867 feet from base to summit. This sacred site to Northern Plains indigenous peoples became America's first national monument in 1906. Between Wyoming's mountain ranges lie vast intermontane basins, lower elevation areas containing rolling hills, valleys, mesas, and terraces. The Bighorn Basin and Powder River Basin dominate the north. The Wind River Basin occupies west-central Wyoming. The Green River, Great Divide, and Washakie Basins spread across the southwest. The Great Divide Basin is particularly interesting. Here, the Continental Divide splits to form an enclosed basin where water cannot escape to either ocean. It simply evaporates or sinks into the ground. The Red Desert covers part of this basin and extends south, featuring sparse vegetation across a harsh landscape that nonetheless supports unique wildlife. These basins typically receive the least precipitation in Wyoming, sometimes as little as 5 to 8 inches annually in places like the Bighorn Basin, making it nearly a true desert. Plant life includes various subspecies of sagebrush, juniper, and grasses like wheatgrass, but the basins are known for their diversity of plant and animal species despite the harsh conditions. The Continental Divide snakes through Wyoming, determining whether water flows toward the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans. Major river systems originate in Wyoming's mountains and flow in all directions. The Yellowstone River, the longest free-flowing river in the continental United States, originates in Yellowstone National Park and flows north into Montana before joining the Missouri. The North Platte River begins in the mountains of northern Colorado and flows through Wyoming before entering Nebraska, eventually joining the Missouri River system. The Green River flows south from the Wind River Range toward the Colorado River. On the western slope, the Snake River begins its journey in Yellowstone, flowing through Jackson Hole and the Tetons before continuing to Idaho and eventually the Columbia River and Pacific Ocean. Wyoming contains more than 70% of its lakes, rivers, and streams in the Missouri-Mississippi drainage system, ultimately reaching the Atlantic. Yellowstone Lake and Jackson Lake are Wyoming's two largest natural bodies of water. Wyoming's climate is generally semi-arid and continental, characterized by long, cold winters and short summers with hot days and chilly nights. It's one of the driest and windiest states in the nation. Summer high temperatures average between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit in most areas, though this drops rapidly with elevation. Locations above 9,000 feet average around 70 degrees, even in July. Summer nights throughout the state cool rapidly, with even the hottest locations dropping into the 50 to 60 degree range. Winter is a different story. The season is cold but variable, with periods of extreme cold interspersed with milder weather. Chinook winds can bring unusually warm temperatures to some locations. Most precipitation falls in late spring and early summer across most of the state. Wyoming holds some dramatic temperature records. The state's highest recorded temperature is 114 degrees Fahrenheit at Basin, in 1983. The lowest is minus 66 degrees Fahrenheit at Riverside in 1933, and sources also note minus 66 degrees Fahrenheit at Yellowstone National Park in the same year. Precipitation varies dramatically with elevation. Lower areas might receive less than 10 inches of rainfall annually, while some mountain areas receive 20 inches or more, much of it as snow. Some high elevations can receive 200 inches or more of snow annually. Wyoming is subject to severe weather. The southeastern corner is most vulnerable to tornadoes, though they tend to be small and brief compared to those farther east. The state's wide open spaces and high elevation make it particularly windy, a characteristic that both challenges residents and presents opportunities for wind energy development. This varied geography creates the stage for some of America's most spectacular natural features. Yellowstone National Park, established in 1872 as the world's first national park, occupies the northwestern corner. It contains about half the world's active geysers, including the famous Old Faithful, along with hot springs, mud pots, and the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. Grand Teton National Park showcases the dramatic Teton Range and Jackson Hole Valley. Devil's Tower stands as a geological marvel. Fossil Butte National Monument preserves some of the best preserved fossils in the world. The Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area features canyon walls rising more than 1,000 feet above Bighorn Lake. From alpine tundra to sagebrush shrublands, from geothermal features to ancient fossil beds, Wyoming's geography tells a story of geological forces, climate extremes, and natural beauty on a grand scale. Long before Wyoming appeared on any map, before borders divided the land, the region known today as Wyoming was home to diverse indigenous peoples whose histories stretch back thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests human habitation in the Wyoming area dating back at least 11,000 years, with the first peoples arriving from Asia via the Bering Strait approximately 20,000 years ago. These early inhabitants were nomadic hunters and gatherers who moved seasonally to follow food sources, particularly the vast herds of buffalo that once covered the plains. The sheep-eater Shoshone, known as the Tukadika, have one of the longest duration occupations of what is now Wyoming, with archaeological evidence suggesting continuous presence in the Yellowstone region spanning more than 1,000 years. By the time European explorers arrived, approximately 13 different tribes traversed or called Wyoming home. The Arapaho, Arikara, Bannock, Blackfeet, Cheyenne, Crow, Gros Ventre, Kiowa, Nez Perce, Sheep-eater, Sioux, Shoshone, and Ute. The Shoshone were among the first large tribes to make their way into Wyoming, arriving before the 18th century from what is now Nevada. They gained dominance in western Wyoming during the 1700s because they were the first northern tribes to acquire horses from Spanish traders in the southwest. This gave them a significant advantage in hunting and warfare, and they largely controlled much of western Wyoming until other tribes like the Blackfeet also acquired horses. The Cheyenne arrived from the northeast in the 1700s, pursuing the buffalo herds that were essential to their survival. The Cheyenne were nomadic people who used every part of the buffalo for food, clothing, shelter, and trade. Their hunting techniques were sophisticated, often using the landscape to their advantage by driving buffalo into natural pens created under banks or bluffs. The Lakota Sioux, another powerful warrior population, allied with the Arapaho and Cheyenne. The Crow, meanwhile, hunted throughout the Yellowstone River area, the Graybull River, and around the Medicine Wheel in the Bighorn Mountains. The Arapaho, originally from the Great Lakes region, migrated west and became buffalo hunters on the plains. They played an important role in introducing horses to other tribes through trade networks connecting Spanish settlements along the Rio Grande with agricultural tribes along the Missouri River. For these tribes, the land was not simply territory to be possessed or divided. It was a living entity that provided for fundamental needs and held deep spiritual significance. The Medicine Wheel, located on Medicine Mountain 40 miles east of Lovell, stands as testimony to this spiritual connection. This ancient stone structure, built with 28 spokes and a circumference of 245 feet, was constructed long before European contact. A Crow chief once said it was built before the light came by people who had no iron. Devil's Tower held particular spiritual importance for numerous tribes, who knew it by various names: Mato Tipila, Greyhorn Butte, Hehotapaha, Bear Rock, Tree Rock, and Grizzly Bear Lodge. The tower remains a sacred site for many Northern Plains tribes today. The tribes had well-established societies complete with chiefs, warriors, and complex religious practices. Art and craft work were integral to daily life and ceremony, with quilling and beading typically done by women and carving by men. As one historian noted, it's as difficult to separate art from the indigenous people's daily life as it is to separate religion from their daily life. All are tightly interwoven. Before any contact with Europeans, extensive trade networks connected Wyoming's tribes with peoples across vast distances. Tribes traded for food, horses, guns, and various goods in networks stretching from the upper Missouri to the Pacific and from Mexico to Canada. While trade flourished, conflicts also occurred. The various tribes sometimes fought with one another over resources, establishing different groups and alliances. However, these conflicts were never about land ownership in the European sense. Land wasn't defined by boundaries until white settlers arrived on the Great Plains, bringing with them the concept of property that could be divided, sold, and made inaccessible. The migration patterns of buffalo were eventually changed by white settlements, forcing the tribes to adapt their traditional ways of life. What was once an endless expanse became politically defined, divided, and claimed by newcomers who didn't understand or respect the indigenous people's relationship with the land. Today, Wyoming is home to one Indian reservation, the Wind River Indian Reservation, located in the west-central portion of the state. Covering approximately 2.2 million acres, it's the seventh largest American Indian reservation in the United States by area and the fifth largest by population. The reservation was established for the Eastern Shoshone tribe in 1868 following negotiations with the U.S. government. Chief Washakie, who lived to be 102 years old, was instrumental in securing this land for his people. When he died in 1900, he was buried with full military honors, the first ever given to an indigenous chief. In a controversial decision, the U.S. government placed the Northern Arapaho on the same reservation in 1878–79, despite the Shoshone and Arapaho having been historic enemies. The two tribes had been in open warfare as recently as 4 years before. This decision created significant tensions that affected reservation life for generations, though, over time, intermarriage and political cooperation have built connections between the tribes. Today, the reservation is home to thousands of members of the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. They continue to preserve their heritage, maintain cultural traditions like powwow dances and beadwork, and work to keep their native languages alive. The reservation includes communities at Fort Washakie, Wind River, Crowheart, the Thetti, and Arapaho. The reservation faces challenges common to many indigenous communities, including high unemployment rates and socioeconomic difficulties. However, it also represents the enduring presence and resilience of Wyoming's original inhabitants. Sacagawea, the famous Shoshone guide for the Lewis and Clark expedition, is buried west of Fort Washakie, a connection to one of America's most celebrated exploration stories that began with indigenous knowledge and guidance. The first recorded European American to enter what is now Wyoming was John Colter in 1807 to 1808. Colter had been part of the Lewis and Clark expedition, and after the expedition ended, he ventured into the Rocky Mountains. His solo exploration took him through a region of steaming geysers and towering waterfalls so unusual that his written reports earned the area the nickname Coulter's Hell. Few believed his fantastic descriptions at the time, but decades later, government expeditions would confirm every word. The early to mid-1800s belonged to the mountain men, rugged fur trappers and traders who penetrated deep into Wyoming's wilderness in search of beaver pelts for the international fur trade. Famous mountain men like Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, Davy Jackson, and Jedediah Smith became the first European Americans to extensively explore Wyoming's mountains and valleys. The fur trade was driven by European fashion. Beaver skins were made into hats, coats, muffs, collars, and linings. Though furs accounted for only about 1% of U.S. annual exports from 1790 to 1890, they reigned as the most profitable trade item on the western frontier. Would-be trappers headed to Wyoming's mountains and streams hoping to cash in. However, Wyoming's fur trappers faced challenges. The markets for their furs were distant, too far for all but extended annual returns with bulky beaver pelts. By the time trappers returned from civilization with goods for another year in the mountains, much of the prime trapping season had passed. The mountain men created good relations with Native Americans. Their success as trappers, and sometimes their very survival, depended on these amiable relationships. American mountain men frequently formed unions with indigenous women. These marriages, though rarely official in the eyes of church or state, provided trappers with domestic help, companionship, and, crucially, a vast network of knowledgeable native hunters and tanners. Indigenous women served as powerful cultural brokers between their families and their French, British, Spanish, or American husbands. The population during the fur trade era was remarkably diverse. Trappers included African Americans, French Canadians, farm boys from Kentucky, lead miners from Missouri, and Native Americans. From the beginning, Wyoming was a diverse society containing competing and complementary cultures. For about 15 years, the American fur trade organized annual summer rendezvous in Wyoming, massive gatherings, usually somewhere along the Green River. These rendezvous allowed fur traders to collect furs from trappers without maintaining expensive forts year-round. Trapper Jim Beckworth described the scene as mirth, songs, dancing, shouting, trading, running, jumping, singing, racing, target shooting, yarns, frolic, with all sorts of extravagances that white men or Indians could invent. In 1830, William Sublette brought the first wagons carrying trading goods up the Platte, North Platte, and Sweetwater rivers before crossing South Pass to reach a rendezvous on the Green River. His crew dug out gullies, improved river crossings, and cleared brush, establishing that the eastern part of what would become the Oregon Trail was passable by wagons. The fur trade began collapsing in the late 1830s. Fashion changed. Silk hats replaced beaver hats. The international market crashed. By 1841, the American Fur Company and Rocky Mountain Fur Company were in ruins. By 1846, only about 50 American trappers still worked in the Snake River country, compared to 500 to 600 in 1826. But the mountain men's knowledge didn't go to waste. Many turned to guiding wagon trains or became suppliers for the floods of emigrants heading west. Jim Bridger and his partner Louis Vasquez built Fort Bridger in southwestern Wyoming around 1841 to 42. Initially designed as a trading post for trappers, it became a popular provisioning stop for Oregon Trail travelers. Fort Laramie, established as a fur post in 1834, similarly transformed into an important supply station for westward-bound pioneers. By the 1840s, hundreds of thousands of American pioneers were streaming west through Wyoming on the Oregon Trail, seeking new opportunities in Oregon, Utah, and California. Economic depressions in 1837 and 1841 frustrated farmers and businessmen east of the Mississippi. The collapse of the fur trade intensified hard times. Fear of British domination of Oregon Territory provided additional motivation to move west. Between 1841 and 1860, approximately 350,000 travelers used trails crossing Wyoming, more people than would live in Wyoming until 1960. Over 200,000 were bound for California, 50,000 for Oregon, and 70,000 Mormons headed for Utah. The Oregon Trail entered Wyoming following the North Platte River. Travelers typically aimed to reach Independence Rock, a massive granite formation in central Wyoming, by July 4th, as this milestone indicated they were on schedule to cross the Rocky Mountains before winter snows closed the mountain passes. So many people carved their names into Independence Rock that it became known as the Great Register of the Desert. Near present-day Guernsey, deep ruts worn into soft sandstone by thousands of wagon wheels and oxen hooves provide a vivid physical reminder of the emigration period. These signature ruts are among the most dramatic examples of Oregon Trail remnants. Wyoming served as a crucial corridor, but rarely as a destination. From the beginning, Wyoming was crossed by what historians call trails to somewhere else. The travelers rarely considered Wyoming itself as a place to settle. This pattern would continue even into the railroad era and persists in some ways today, with Interstate 80 and major highways carrying travelers through rather than to Wyoming. The journey through Wyoming was arduous and dangerous. According to the Oregon-California Trails Association, almost 1 in 10 who embarked on the trail didn't survive. Cholera, accidents, drownings, and exposure claimed thousands of lives. Still, the promise of free land in Oregon or gold in California kept the wagons rolling. Fort Laramie became the most significant outpost on the Oregon Trail system. Originally established in 1834 by fur traders William Sublette and Robert Campbell, it evolved into a military post that witnessed the development of the open-range cattle industry, the arrival of homesteaders, and conflicts between the U.S. Army and Plains Indians. Great Indian councils attempting to bring peace occurred here in 1851 and 1866–68, though ultimately these treaties failed to prevent conflict. Fort Caspar, originally Platte Bridge Station, evolved from the Mormon Ferry Post. After Louis Gunnard built a 1,000-foot log bridge across the North Platte in 1859, it became one of the last opportunities for pioneers to cross the river they had followed from Nebraska. The post was named after Lieutenant Caspar Collins, who was killed in 1865 while protecting a supply train from attack. When the town of Caspar was established, a frontier army clerk supposedly misspelled the lieutenant's name, resulting in today's different spelling. With completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869, westward wagon travel decreased dramatically. The Union Pacific Railroad had reached Cheyenne in 1867, stimulating population growth. The railroad brought new settlers and enabled the establishment of towns, including Cheyenne, which became the territorial capital. The railroad followed a route through southern Wyoming that still serves as one of the state's major transportation corridors. Today, the tracks of the Union Pacific Railroad share that corridor with Interstate 80, one of the country's most important east-west highways. The Transcontinental Railroad transformed Wyoming from a trail to somewhere else into a place where people could settle more easily. Coal mining began in earnest in the mid-1860s when the railroad arrived, creating Wyoming's first major industry. The federal government established Wyoming Territory on July 25, 1868. Unlike mineral-rich Colorado, Wyoming didn't have significant deposits of gold and silver and thus didn't experience the same population boom. South Pass City had a brief boom after the Carissa mine began producing gold in 1867, and copper was mined between the Sierra Madre Mountains and Snowy Range near Grand Encampment. But Wyoming's population grew slowly. Once government-sponsored expeditions to the Yellowstone country began, Coulter's and mountain man Jim Bridger's descriptions of the region's landscape were confirmed. In 1872, Yellowstone became the world's first national park, set aside to protect this unique area forever. On July 10, 1890, Wyoming became the Union's 44th state. Wyoming was the first state to allow women the right to vote, having done so since it was a territory in 1869. It was also the first state to grant women the right to hold elected office, and the first state to elect a female governor. In honor of this history, Wyoming's official nickname is the Equality State, and its motto is Equal Rights. On December 10, 1869, Wyoming's territorial legislature did something revolutionary. They passed a bill granting women the right to vote and hold public office, making Wyoming the first government in the world to grant women full suffrage and equal rights with men. This happened a full 50 years before the 19th Amendment extended voting rights to women nationwide. It happened when Wyoming was still just a territory with a population of only a few thousand people. It happened in a place that most Americans couldn't find on a map. The legislation was simple and direct. Every woman of the age of 21 years residing in this territory may, at every election to be holden under the laws thereof, cast her vote, and her rights to the elective franchise and to hold office shall be the same under the election laws of the territory as those of electors. The story of how Wyoming granted women the vote is complex, involving partisan politics, practical considerations, and genuine progressive ideals all mixed together. William H. Bright, a Democrat who represented South Pass City, introduced the suffrage bill in the territorial legislature. The legislature was composed entirely of men, yet they voted to give women equal voting rights. The Legislative Council passed the bill 6 votes to 2. The House tried to attach various amendments to make the bill unattractive, but ultimately passed it 7 votes to 4, with 1 abstention. Governor John Campbell, a Republican appointed by President Grant, took several days to decide what to do. Many assumed he would veto the bill. After all, Democrats had passed it partly hoping to embarrass him politically. But Campbell signed it into law on December 10, 1869. Why did Wyoming's male legislators grant women the vote when similar bills had failed in Washington Territory, Nebraska, Dakota Territory, and even progressive states like Kansas? Several factors came together. First, Wyoming needed to attract women to the sparsely populated territory. Many legislators understood that women played integral roles in life on the frontier and deserved a say in how the territory was governed. Second, Wyoming's status as a territory made change easier. Unlike in states where constitutional amendments often required popular votes, Wyoming only needed a majority in both legislative houses and the governor's signature. Third, some legislators genuinely believed in equal rights. Governor Campbell's later writings show he sincerely believed women deserved the vote. Fourth, partisan politics played a role. Democrats thought passing the bill might embarrass Republican Governor Campbell or attract Democratic-leaning women voters. What followed was a cascade of firsts for women in America. On September 6, 1870, in Laramie, 70-year-old Louisa Swain became the first woman in the United States to cast a vote under a law granting women full suffrage. She reportedly brought a pail of yeast to give to an election official as she voted. In March 1870, Laramie impaneled the first women to serve on a jury in the United States. 6 women were called for grand jury duty. Despite objections from lawyers, judges stood firm, and the women served. The following month, women were sworn in on a petit jury. Martha Simons Boyes Atkinson was appointed the first female bailiff in the United States in 1870, assigned to attend to the needs of female jurors. On February 17, 1870, Esther Hobart Morris was appointed as Justice of the Peace in South Pass City, becoming the first female justice of the peace in the United States. During her 8-month term, she presided over dozens of cases. Her first act was to charge her predecessor for failing to hand over the court's records, though she dropped the charges due to conflict of interest. In 1894, Estelle Real became the first woman elected to statewide office in Wyoming when she won the position of Superintendent of Public Instruction. In 1910, Mary Godat Bellamy became Wyoming's first female legislator when she was elected to the State House of Representatives. In 1920, the town of Jackson elected 3 councilwomen, a female town marshal, and a female mayor. The press dubbed it the petticoat government. Several of these women were re-elected. On November 5, 1924, Nellie Taylor Ross was elected governor of Wyoming. Although she and Ma Ferguson of Texas were elected on the same day, Ross was inaugurated on January 5, 1925, 2 weeks before Ferguson, making her the first female governor in United States history. Wyoming's progressive stance on women's suffrage wasn't without challenges. In 1871, the Second Territorial Legislature, now dominated by Democrats, voted to repeal the suffrage law. Governor Campbell vetoed the repeal, declaring, "No legislature has the right to disenfranchise its own constituents." The House mustered the 2/3 vote needed to override the veto, but the council fell 1 vote short. The suffrage law survived. Interestingly, while women could vote and hold office, they were barred from jury service in 1871, less than 2 years after the practice began. This ban lasted until 1950. Wyoming women served on juries during the territorial period, but couldn't serve again for 80 years after statehood. When Wyoming applied for statehood in 1889, some delegates to the Constitutional Convention feared that women's suffrage might jeopardize Wyoming's admission to the Union. They were right. Some members of the U.S. Congress tried to remove the woman's suffrage clause from Wyoming's Constitution. The territorial legislature's response was defiant. They sent a telegram stating that Wyoming would rather remain out of the Union for 100 years than join without women's suffrage. Congress backed down. Wyoming was admitted as a state on July 10, 1890, with Article 6 of its Constitution guaranteeing universal suffrage regardless of gender. Wyoming became the first state in the nation with women's suffrage written into its Constitution. Wyoming ratified the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution on January 27, 1920. Becoming the 27th state to do so, even though Wyoming women had enjoyed voting rights for 51 years already. In 1973, Wyoming became the 23rd state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, though the amendment ultimately fell short of the 38 states needed for ratification. Today, a statue of Esther Hobart Morris stands in front of Wyoming State Capitol in Cheyenne. The inscription reads, "Esther Hobart Morris, proponent of the legislative act which, in 1869, gave distinction to the territory of Wyoming as the first government in the world to grant women equal rights." A replica of this statue stands in the National Statuary Hall at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., representing Wyoming's contribution to American democracy. While historians debate whether Esther Morris truly originated the suffrage legislation, Wyoming's achievement remains undeniable. The Equality State earned its nickname and its motto, equal rights, through groundbreaking action that changed the course of American history. Wyoming's economy has been shaped by what lies beneath its surface more than almost any other state in America. Coal, oil, natural gas, uranium, trona, and bentonite have driven Wyoming's development and continue to define its economic identity today. The mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction industry contributed approximately $6.5 billion to Wyoming's GDP in 2023, more than any other single industry. This represents about 16% of the state's total economic output. For perspective, the The next largest contributor, professional and business services, added only about $2.8 billion. More remarkably, mineral royalties, severance payments, and related taxes typically provide 50 to 65% of Wyoming's total state tax revenue, funding schools, roads, hospitals, police, and emergency services across the state. Wyoming has led the nation in coal production since 1988. In 2024, Wyoming produced almost 2/5 of all coal mined in the United States. The state holds 1/3 of U.S. coal reserves at producing mines. Wyoming has 7 of the 10 largest coal mines in the nation. These massive operations are concentrated primarily in the Powder River Basin in the northeastern part of the state. The coal seams here are extraordinary. Some exceed 100 feet thick and lie at shallow depths, allowing for large-scale mechanized surface mining. Nearly all of Wyoming's coal is subbituminous, which has a lower heating value than other types of coal, but also contains less sulfur, making it cleaner burning. The state accounts for almost 90% of all U.S. production of subbituminous coal. Coal mining began in Wyoming in the mid-1860s when the Union Pacific Railroad arrived. Today, most mined coal is loaded onto unit trains that can stretch up to 1.5 miles long with about 130 coal cars. Wyoming's coal is shipped to about half the states, with power plants in Texas, Missouri, Wyoming, and Illinois being the biggest users. Coal mining has contributed more than $1 billion annually to state and local budgets in recent years. When production declines, Wyoming's budget suffers directly. The 2016 coal downturn forced lawmakers to drastically cut funding for public schools, suicide prevention programs, healthcare services, and fish and wildlife management. However, Wyoming's coal industry faces significant challenges. Annual production declined in 2024 to the lowest level since 1992, as coal-fired power plants shut down across the nation and natural gas and renewable electricity generation increased. The transition away from coal poses an existential question for Wyoming's economy. Wyoming holds about 2% of U.S. proved crude oil reserves and ranks 7th in crude oil production, accounting for 2% of the nation's total output. In 2024, Wyoming's crude oil production reached its highest level in 35 years. The state is also the 10th largest natural gas producer, accounting for about 2% of U.S. marketed gas production. The largest known oil and gas deposits are in northeastern Wyoming, though significant reserves exist across the state. The Southwest holds oil shale reserves as well. Wyoming's energy sector isn't just about extraction. It's about jobs. The mining sector provided 33% of Wyoming's GDP while employing about 9.5% of the workforce in 2013. These jobs pay significantly higher wages than most other sectors. Over the past decade, the mineral and energy economy contributed an average of 28,253 direct jobs, 17,625 indirect jobs, and 13,091 induced jobs annually. Total annual wages from direct jobs in the mineral and energy economy have averaged nearly $2.1 billion per year over the past 5 years. Wyoming has taken a unique approach to managing its mineral wealth. The state's Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, effectively a sovereign wealth fund, has been capitalized with revenues from coal, oil, and gas production. As of July 2024, it stood at more than $11 billion. Coal revenues have also provided most of the funding for school construction and maintenance in the state over the past few decades. One analysis estimated that a hypothetical Wyoming family of 3 in a modest home uses roughly $28,000 worth of public services per year while paying just $3,770 in taxes, with most of the difference covered by coal, oil, and gas revenues. This creates both opportunity and vulnerability. Wyoming residents enjoy very low tax burdens. There's no state income tax. But this also means Wyoming's budget is extremely sensitive to commodity price fluctuations. Beyond fossil fuels, Wyoming contains vast quantities of other valuable minerals. Uranium. Wyoming has substantial uranium deposits, estimated to account for 1/3 of total U.S. reserves. The largest deposits are in the Red Desert, Shirley Basin, South Powder River Basin, Gas Hills, and Pumpkin Buttes areas. Trona, unrefined soda ash. Wyoming contains massive trona deposits used in glass manufacturing, chemicals, and various industrial processes. Bentonite clay, used as drilling mud and foundry binder. Gypsum, limestone, and iron ore are also found in significant quantities. While gold and gemstones have been found in the Wind River Mountains and elsewhere, they are not mined in commercial quantities. Wyoming faces a profound challenge. The state's economy is more dependent on fossil fuel extraction than any other state in the nation. The renewable energy transition threatens to fundamentally reshape Wyoming's economic foundations. In response, Wyoming has launched economic diversification initiatives like Endow, designed to attract new manufacturing and technology businesses. The state is also pursuing carbon capture and sequestration technologies, hoping to continue coal use while reducing emissions. Wyoming's wind energy potential is enormous. The state has some of the strongest and most consistent winds in the country. Wind power generation has more than doubled since 2019 and accounted for 23% of Wyoming's total electricity net generation in 2024. However, wind energy development faces political resistance from those who see it as competition for fossil fuels. Wyoming is the only state that taxes wind production at $1 per megawatt hour, and some lawmakers have proposed increasing this tax significantly. The transition creates a dilemma for workers. A coal miner might earn $80,000 annually, while a starting wind turbine technician makes $40,000. Many miners are reluctant to uproot families or accept significant pay cuts, even as the long-term prospects of coal mining decline. Wyoming's future prosperity depends on navigating this transition while maintaining the services that mineral revenues have funded for generations. While minerals drive Wyoming's economy, the cowboy image defines its soul. As one of Wyoming's nicknames, the Cowboy State, suggests, ranching has been historically important both economically and culturally. Cattle and sheep ranching remains significant in Wyoming's agricultural sector. The state ranks among the top states in wool production. Wyoming's vast open plains provide ideal grazing land, and the ranching lifestyle became deeply ingrained in state culture during the late 1800s. The rise of cowboy culture traces back to the late 1800s when cattle ranching became prominent. As settlers moved westward, they brought cattle with them, and Wyoming's vast open plains provided perfect grazing land. Cowboys, skilled in herding and managing cattle, played crucial roles in the ranching industry's success. Cattle outnumber people in Wyoming by almost 3-to-1. About half of Wyoming's workers are employed in the service industry, with agriculture employing a smaller but culturally significant portion of the workforce. Wyoming also produces crops, including wheat, beans, barley, oats, and sugar beets, primarily in irrigated areas like the Laramie Plains and various river valleys. Tourism has become increasingly important to Wyoming's economy. National parks, including Yellowstone and Grand Teton, plus national monuments like Devil's Tower and Fossil Butte, help make tourism one of Wyoming's major industries. While tourism and related industries provide substantial employment, about 12.3% of jobs, These positions tend to pay much lower wages than mining sector jobs. The value-added component to GDP, 3.3%, is also much lower than mining's contribution. Still, millions of visitors come to Wyoming each year to experience its natural wonders, Western heritage, and outdoor recreation opportunities. The Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody attracts visitors interested in Western history. Historic sites like Fort Laramie and the Oregon Trail ruts near Guernsey draw history enthusiasts. Jackson Hole has become one of the top ski destinations in the country. Wyoming's tourism industry provides a more diversified economic base and offers opportunities in communities across the state, not just in energy-producing regions. Manufacturing in Wyoming is generally related to processing raw minerals mined in the state. Chemical plants produce fertilizers and agricultural chemicals. Construction and farming machinery, foodstuffs, soap, and stone, glass, and clay products are also manufactured. Government services and transportation also employ significant numbers of workers. Many people work for federal agencies managing public lands. The federal government owns just under half of Wyoming's land. The state's unemployment rate has historically been lower and personal income growth higher than the national average, mainly because of the prosperous mining and energy sectors. However, this creates boom and bust cycles tied to commodity prices. Wyoming is America's least populous state, with an estimated population of 587,000 as of 2024. It's also the 10th largest state by area at 97,813 square miles. This creates the second lowest population density in the nation, trailing only Alaska. To put this in perspective, Wyoming's total population is less than that of many single cities elsewhere. Washington, D.C. has more people than the entire state of Wyoming. Wyoming actually has fewer people than it has pronghorn antelope. The population is unevenly distributed. Nearly 70% of Wyoming's residents live in incorporated places, and almost half the population lives in just 11 cities and towns with populations over 10,000. Cheyenne serves as both the state capital and most populous city, with a population of approximately 66,000. Located in the southeastern corner of the state, Cheyenne grew from a tent city along the Union Pacific Railroad in 1867 to become Wyoming's governmental and economic center. The city is one of the country's least centrally located state capitals. Tourism, government services, transportation, and manufacturing drive Cheyenne's economy. The city hosts Cheyenne Frontier Days, one of the largest outdoor rodeo and Western celebration events in the world. Casper, with about 59,000 people, is Wyoming's second largest city. Located in east-central Wyoming on the North Platte River, Casper serves as a regional hub for healthcare and energy industries. The city grew around the Oregon Trail and later became a center for oil refining. Other significant cities include Gillette, population approximately 34,000, the heart of the Powder River Basin coal mining region, often called the energy capital of the nation. Laramie, approximately 33,000, home to the University of Wyoming, the state's only four-year public university. Rock Springs, approximately 23,000, a coal mining and natural gas center. Sheridan, approximately 18,000, a ranching and tourism community near the Bighorn Mountains. Green River, approximately 12,000, an industrial city along the Green River. Evanston, approximately 12,000, near the Utah border with ties to the railroad and oil refining. Jackson, approximately 10,000, a world-famous resort town at the base of the Tetons. Jackson deserves special mention. While Jackson refers only to the town, Jackson Hole encompasses the entire valley, including Teton Village, Wilson, and surrounding areas. Jackson Hole is known as one of the top ski destinations in the country and serves as a gateway to Grand Teton National Park. The town's vibrant downtown, with its iconic antler arches and the town square, contrasts sharply with Wyoming's rural character. Property values here rival those in major metropolitan areas. Wyoming's population is predominantly white, with approximately 86% identifying as white alone. About 16% identify as Hispanic or Latino of any race. Smaller percentages include Native Americans, 2%, Black or African Americans, 1%, Asian Americans, 1%, and people identifying as two or more races, 7%. The median age is around 39 years. The median household income is approximately $75,000, slightly above the national median. English is the dominant language, spoken by about 93% of residents. About 5% speak Spanish, with smaller percentages speaking European and Asian languages. Wyoming's population has been relatively stable or slowly growing in recent years, with some counties experiencing growth while others, particularly those dependent on energy production, face population declines when commodity prices drop. Yellowstone National Park, established in 1872, was the world's first national park. About 96% of its 2.2 million acres lie within Wyoming's borders. The park contains about half the world's active geysers, including Old Faithful, which erupts approximately every 90 minutes, spewing 14,000 to 31,800 liters of geothermal water up to 56 meters into the air. The Grand Prismatic Spring, Yellowstone's largest hot spring, measures about 300 feet in diameter and more than 120 feet deep. Its brilliant blue center, surrounded by rainbow-colored rings, creates one of nature's most spectacular sights. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone features dramatic waterfalls, including the Upper and Lower Falls. Yellowstone Lake, the largest high-elevation lake in North America, spans 136 square miles. Grand Teton National Park, covering about 310,000 acres, showcases the dramatic Teton Range. The park offers exceptional wildlife viewing, with opportunities to see grizzly bears, black bears, elk, moose, and bighorn sheep. The Snake River winds through Jackson Hole, creating iconic reflection shots of the mountains, particularly at Schwabacher Landing and Oxbow Bend. Devil's Tower National Monument, America's first national monument established in 1906, rises 1,267 feet above the Belle Fourche River. The tower is sacred to more than 20 Native American tribes. Its columnar jointing pattern makes it one of the finest crack climbing areas in North America, attracting climbers from around the world. Other notable protected areas include Fossil Butte National Monument, preserving some of the world's best preserved fossils. Fort Laramie National Historic Site, telling the story of westward expansion. Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area, featuring dramatic canyon walls rising more than 1,000 feet. Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area. Wyoming offers a unique quality of life. The state combines wide open spaces, spectacular natural beauty, low crime rates in most areas, no state income tax, and relatively affordable cost of living, except in resort communities like Jackson. However, Wyoming also faces challenges: harsh winters, limited economic diversity, geographic isolation, and the boom and bust cycles of resource extraction. Healthcare access can be limited in rural areas, and the state has struggled with high rates of suicide and substance abuse. Wyoming's small population creates both opportunities and challenges for governance. The state legislature remains a part-time citizen legislature, with lawmakers maintaining other jobs and meeting for short sessions. This keeps government close to the people, but can also limit the state's ability to address complex policy challenges. The Wyoming spirit emphasizes self-reliance, independence, and connection to the land. It's a place where neighbors help neighbors, where the rodeo remains relevant, and where the frontier heritage isn't just history. It's a living part of everyday culture. From the geothermal wonders of Yellowstone to the windswept plains of the east, from the jagged Tetons to the columnar marvel of Devil's Tower, Wyoming embodies contradictions that define the American West. It's a state where fewer than 600,000 people occupy nearly 98,000 square miles, more space than substance in population terms, yet rich in natural resources that fuel the nation. It's where coal miners and cowboys share the landscape with grizzly bears and pronghorn antelope, where the legacy of the frontier persists alongside modern challenges of economic transition and environmental stewardship. Wyoming gave women the vote 50 years before the rest of the nation, earning its title as the Equality State. It established the world's first national park, preserving Yellowstone's wonders for all humanity. It supplies energy to power homes across America while harboring some of the continent's last great wilderness areas. The state's economy rises and falls with commodity prices, its budget dependent on coal, oil, and gas revenues, even as the energy transition challenges this foundation. Wyoming faces a future where wind turbines might replace coal mines, where tourism could overtake extraction, where diversification becomes not just desirable, but necessary. Yet through all the changes, Wyoming remains fundamentally itself, a place of extremes, of spectacular beauty, of wide horizons and big skies. It's where you can still see more stars than streetlights, where wildlife outnumbers people, where the past is preserved in Oregon Trail ruts and the future beckons with renewable energy potential. For those who call Wyoming home, it's not just a place on a map. It's a way of life, a connection to land and heritage, a commitment to independence and equality. For visitors, it offers a glimpse of what America once was and what it might preserve. Natural wonders, Western heritage, and wide open spaces in an increasingly crowded world. Wyoming, the Equality State, the Cowboy State, the land of geysers and mountains, coal mines and cattle ranches. Least populous but rich in character, the last bastion of the American West.